Have you ever trusted someone so completely, only to realize you were just a stepping stone in their life? Where are you watching from? And what time is it over there? Don't forget to subscribe to her revenge stories and share your thoughts in the comments below. I want to hear your experiences too. My name is Leah Foster, and what I went through that day still makes my heart race when I think about it. I never imagined I would find myself in a situation like this, standing in the living room of the apartment I helped pay for, staring at the very man I thought I loved, realizing everything had been a lie. It started with little things, tiny cracks that I ignored because I wanted to believe the best in people. But as the day unfolded, the truth hit me with a force I couldn't escape, and I realized that sometimes love can be the most dangerous blindfold of all. I had been dating Ryan for almost 2 years. He was charming, funny, and had that boy-next-door quality that made me feel safe. When we moved in together, I thought it was the start of something serious, a partnership built on trust. But soon, subtle signs began to appear, his avoidance when I brought up money, the way he hesitated to discuss bills, and the strange looks when I mentioned wanting to decorate the apartment. At first, I brushed it off as paranoia, but deep down, I felt the unease creeping in. The morning of that day began like any other. The sunlight filtered through our bedroom blinds, casting stripes across the hardwood floors. I was in the kitchen, making coffee, humming softly to myself, and feeling that quiet contentment that comes from being at home. Ryan was still asleep, sprawled across the couch in the living room, phone in hand, scrolling aimlessly. I had no idea that within hours, the life I had worked so hard to build would be shaken to its core. I poured myself a cup of coffee and took a sip, savoring the warmth. The apartment was unusually quiet, almost too quiet, and that little voice in my head told me to pay attention. I tried to shake it off. Maybe it was just one of those fleeting instincts, but I couldn't. Something was off, though I couldn't pinpoint what. I finished my coffee, set the cup in the sink, and walked into the living room, where Ryan was still lying on the couch, eyes glued to the phone. "Morning," I said cheerfully, forcing my voice to sound casual. "Morning," he replied without looking up, his tone distant. I frowned slightly, sensing the tension in the air. "Everything okay?" I asked. Ryan hesitated, then shrugged. "Yeah, just tired," he said, but something in his eyes betrayed him. I tried to dismiss it, telling myself I was overthinking. After all, he had been working late nights lately, and stress could explain anything. I decided to tidy up the apartment a bit, sweeping the floor, straightening cushions, and wiping down the counters. As I moved about, I noticed his phone buzzing repeatedly. I wasn't one to snoop, but the curiosity was gnawing at me. I glanced at the screen over his shoulder when he briefly looked away. My stomach sank. Text messages from a car dealership, financial statements, and what looked like payment confirmations. My heart thumped painfully. I stepped back, trying to process what I had just seen. Ryan had been using me, my money, my efforts, to cover bills, rent, and even his so-called dream car. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I felt foolish, betrayed, and enraged all at once. I had trusted him, believed in him, and now, in one moment, everything crumbled. I sat down on the couch, my hands trembling slightly, and took deep breaths to calm myself. My mind raced, trying to figure out the next steps. I had always been a rational person, careful with money, aware of what was mine and what was shared. Yet, I had allowed someone else's charm and manipulations to blind me. It was infuriating. As I sat there, I realized I had 2 choices: crumble under the betrayal or take action. I wasn't the type to be walked over. I wasn't going to let someone take advantage of my hard work and my generosity. The anger that coursed through me became a catalyst, sharpening my focus. I needed a plan, and I needed it fast. I remembered the title of the lease agreement we had signed together. It was in my name. That meant legally I had leverage. The thought alone made my blood boil with both anticipation and satisfaction. He thought he was in control, but he had underestimated me. And that underestimation was about to be his downfall. I got up and walked to my bedroom, rifling through the drawer where I kept important documents. Lease papers, utility bills, bank statements, everything was neatly organized. I reviewed each one carefully, confirming what I suspected. The apartment was technically under my name alone. The car, however, was trickier. It was financed, registered under his name, but with payments made partially by me. There had to be a way to turn that situation to my advantage. I sat back on the bed, my mind working through every possible scenario. This wasn't about revenge in a petty sense. It was about justice. He had tried to manipulate and use me, thinking I would never notice, never act, never stand up. I wasn't going to let that happen. I called my friend Jenna, who had always been a voice of reason in my life. I explained the situation carefully, leaving out the emotional outburst and focusing on the facts. Jenna listened, offering advice and practical steps. Her voice was calm, grounding me in the chaos of the moment. "Leah, you need to approach this smartly," she said. "Don't let anger make you reckless. Use what you know to your advantage." Her words resonated. I had been impulsive in the past, but this time I needed precision. I thanked her and hung up, feeling a renewed sense of clarity. I drafted a plan, step by step, making sure each action was legally sound and carefully calculated. The first step involved documenting everything: payment receipts, messages, emails. I had to ensure that there was an undeniable paper trail. By mid-morning, I was moving with purpose. I opened my laptop and began compiling evidence, screenshots, and digital copies of every transaction I had contributed toward the car and apartment. Each document I saved made my resolve stronger. Ryan still thought he had the upper hand, lounging on the couch, oblivious to the storm that was brewing quietly around him. I decided to confront him, but not in a way that revealed my plan. I wanted him to feel the tension, the uncertainty. I approached him with a neutral expression, carrying my laptop and a folder of papers. "Ryan, we need to talk about finances," I said calmly. His head snapped up, a mixture of irritation and curiosity crossing his face. "What about finances?" he asked, feigning ignorance. I placed the folder on the coffee table, keeping my tone steady. "I think it's time we review what's mine, what's shared, and what has been misused." His eyes widened slightly as he glanced at the papers. I could see the realization beginning to dawn, but he tried to maintain composure. I walked slowly around the apartment, casually mentioning every detail I had uncovered. The tension grew, a quiet storm building between us. I watched him squirm as I outlined the payments, the contributions, the texts, and the confirmations. Each piece of evidence was a nail in the coffin of his deceit. By the time I finished, he was pale, silent, and unable to form a coherent response. I sat back on the couch, keeping my expression calm, almost serene. The power dynamic had shifted. I wasn't angry in a reckless way anymore. I was precise, measured, and in control. The next step involved the car. I had discovered that although it was in his name, the financing company required a co-signer, and that was me. That detail gave me the leverage I needed. If I acted carefully, I could claim my stake and, if necessary, repossess the vehicle legally. The idea of finally seeing him confront the consequences of his actions sent a thrill through me. I spent the afternoon executing the first phase of my plan. I contacted the finance company under the guise of needing account clarification. My tone was casual, friendly, and unassuming. I inquired about the co-signer terms, the repossession clauses, and all the necessary details. Each piece of information confirmed what I had suspected. I had the legal right to reclaim the car, if I chose. By late afternoon, I had everything I needed. The documents were ready, the steps mapped out, and my heart beat with a mix of excitement and calm satisfaction. I watched Ryan move around the apartment, still unaware that his world was about to shift dramatically. Finally, I approached the climax of my plan. I didn't rush. Timing was everything. I calmly called the finance company, provided the necessary information, and initiated the process to repossess the car. I kept my composure, speaking politely, ensuring there was no room for error. With that one action, I had set the final wheels of justice in motion. As I hung up, I turned to Ryan, who was now pacing nervously, sensing something but not knowing what. I smiled faintly, a small, controlled expression of triumph. The day had started with betrayal, manipulation, and deceit, but it would end with clarity, empowerment, and the undeniable satisfaction of watching the consequences unfold. I made myself comfortable on the couch, pretending to scroll on my phone. The suspense would do its work naturally. I could hear him muttering under his breath, the tension building, the realization creeping closer. By evening, everything would shift. By the end of the day, the balance of power would have irrevocably changed. The sunlight dimmed slightly as I sat there, calm, collected, and fully aware of the steps I had taken. It was remarkable, almost poetic, how a day that began with betrayal could be transformed into a lesson in empowerment and justice. I felt proud, not for revenge in itself, but for standing up, for refusing to be used, and for asserting control over my life and my resources. The phone rang, the finance company confirming the repossession notice, and I finally allowed a small smile to spread across my face. The day's work had paid off, not through anger, not through rash decisions, but through careful, deliberate action. By the time the evening settled in, Ryan was confronting reality. His dream car would soon be gone, his plans foiled, and the deception he had relied on exposed. I watched him, silent, calm, and composed, as the weight of his choices settled on his shoulders. And that, right there, was the power of understanding the rules, staying patient, and taking action when the time was right. It wasn't about making him suffer unnecessarily. It was about reclaiming what was mine and showing, quietly but firmly, that betrayal never goes unnoticed. The evening light stretched across the apartment, soft shadows falling on the walls as I, Leah Foster, watched Ryan pace nervously. He didn't know the exact moment the finance company would begin the repossession process, and the uncertainty was eating at him. It was fascinating to watch someone who had tried to control me now squirm under the weight of his own actions. I kept my expression calm, scrolling casually on my phone, pretending I was engrossed in social media, but every nerve in me was alert. He stopped suddenly, his hands gripping the back of the couch. "Leah, did you call them?" His voice trembled slightly, betraying the fear he was trying to hide. I looked up slowly, giving him the faintest smile.
Who?
"The finance company? Why would I do that?" My tone was light, almost playful, but inside, I was thrilled at the subtle panic creeping across his face. I leaned back, letting the silence stretch. Sometimes, the anticipation is more satisfying than the action itself. Ryan shifted uneasily. I think they might have called. The cosigner. The car," he trailed off, realizing he wasn't in control of the conversation anymore. I took a slow sip of my water, pretending to consider his words. That's interesting," I said softly. "Maybe I should check. Just to make sure everything's okay." His eyes flicked nervously to my laptop, and I realized he was beginning to piece things together. I allowed a faint, almost imperceptible smirk to play across my lips. The small victories, the subtle hints, were part of the fun. It wasn't about cruelty. It was about watching reality hit him where it mattered. I moved over to the couch, placing my laptop on the armrest. I casually typed a few keys, pretending to scroll through emails, though I had already documented everything. I said, "It's funny how things work out when people forget the details. Little things like signatures, receipts, those are powerful." Ryan's jaw tightened. "Leah, I didn't know," his voice faltered, and he looked genuinely shaken. I held his gaze. "Didn't know what exactly?" I asked softly. "That I pay for half the car? Or that I keep track of what's mine?" My tone was calm, deliberate. I wanted him to feel the weight of his own negligence, his own arrogance. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing again. I thought you would notice. I thought I could, I don't know, manage things." I shook my head slowly. "Manage things?" I echoed, raising an eyebrow. Ryan, managing isn't just about making sure bills are paid. It's about honesty, trust, respect. You had all three options and you chose none. He sighed heavily, his shoulders slumping. The tension in the room was palpable. I felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and relief. This wasn't about revenge in the melodramatic sense. It was about restoring balance, asserting boundaries, and making it clear that deceit has consequences. I glanced at my phone, noticing the small notification from the finance company. The repossession was officially in motion. I didn't need to act immediately. The knowledge that it was happening was enough to unsettle him. Sometimes, the anticipation itself is the most potent form of justice. Ryan sank onto the couch beside me, running a hand across his face. Leah, I really messed up, he admitted quietly. His voice was no longer defensive. It carried the weight of recognition, the dawning understanding that he had underestimated me. I stayed silent for a moment, letting him feel the full impact of his confession. Words were unnecessary here. The documents, the receipts, the phone call I had made earlier, all spoke louder than anything I could say. Finally, I spoke, my voice calm and controlled. It's not about messing up, Ryan. It's about consequences. Actions have them, whether we like it or not. You chose to use me, to take advantage, to assume I wouldn't notice. Now you're seeing what happens when someone underestimates you. His eyes flicked nervously toward the window, as if looking for a way to escape the tension that filled the apartment. But there was nowhere to run. The consequences were already in motion, quiet but unstoppable. We sat there for a while in silence. I wanted him to feel the shift in power, the subtle but undeniable shift that comes when someone who is exploited takes back control. The evening sun dipped lower, painting the room in shades of gold and orange, casting long shadows across the floor. I felt a sense of calm clarity, the kind that comes from knowing you've acted decisively, wisely, and ethically. Leah, Ryan's voice was hesitant, almost a whisper. I don't know what to say. I tilted my head slightly, looking at him with measured compassion. You don't need to say anything. The facts speak for themselves. Your actions have consequences. You knew that, and now you're seeing it firsthand. The phone rang again, a brief notification from the finance company confirming the scheduled pickup for the car. I ignored it for now, letting the suspense hang in the air, watching him process each passing minute. Finally, I stood up, moving toward the kitchen to grab another glass of water. Do you realize how easy it is to overlook details? I asked casually, almost rhetorically. A single signature, a single record, it can change everything. He didn't respond immediately. He was too busy processing the implications, the reality settling in that he had been outmaneuvered not by aggression, but by careful attention, awareness, and patience. I walked back to the living room, settling on the couch across from him. Ryan, this isn't about revenge in the petty sense. It's about fairness, about accountability. You had your chance and you chose deceit. I'm simply correcting the imbalance. He swallowed hard, nodding slowly. I get it now, he admitted quietly. His words carried the weight of humility, of regret, and a dawning comprehension that he could no longer manipulate the narrative. I leaned back, letting the silence stretch. The repossession notice, the evidence, the careful documentation, it all worked together like a quiet storm, subtle yet decisive. I could see it in his eyes. The realization that he had miscalculated, that he had underestimated me, and that the consequences were unavoidable. As the evening deepened, I felt a sense of satisfaction, not from cruelty, but from clarity and justice. Ryan had been given every opportunity to act honestly, to communicate openly, and to respect boundaries. He had failed. The repossession of the car, the documentation of payments, the undeniable evidence of his reliance on my resources, it all pointed to a single truth. Deception has a cost. I picked up my phone, texting Jenna to let her know the updates. Her response was immediate and supportive. Good. You're handling this perfectly, Leah. Keep calm and watch it unfold. Her words mirrored my own thoughts. This wasn't about anger or spectacle. It was about demonstrating the consequences of exploitation and deceit. By the time night fell, Ryan was pacing again, muttering under his breath, the reality settling in. I observed quietly, noting every flicker of anxiety, every hesitant glance toward the door. The psychological weight of his choices was now in full effect. I took a deep breath, feeling a sense of calm pride. I had faced betrayal, deception, and manipulation, and I had acted with patience, intelligence, and composure. I had reclaimed control without losing my dignity or ethical grounding. Finally, the car company called to confirm the pickup window. I casually mentioned it to Ryan, watching as his face paled and his voice faltered. It's happening?" he asked, almost whispering. I smiled faintly, keeping my tone light. "Yes, it is. Everything's in motion. There's nothing left to do but wait and see how it unfolds." The room was quiet, save for the ticking of the clock on the wall. I felt a profound sense of satisfaction, not from seeing him suffer, but from witnessing the natural consequences of his choices unfold. The day had started with deceit, manipulation, and betrayal, but it was ending with clarity, balance, and empowerment. As night settled fully, I sat back on the couch, reflecting on the day's events. The lesson was clear. Trust must be earned, boundaries must be respected, and actions, no matter how small, carry weight. Ryan had learned this lesson in the most personal way possible. I glanced at him one last time, his head hanging low, and I felt a quiet sense of closure. This wasn't about revenge in the melodramatic sense. It was about asserting control, reclaiming what was mine, and witnessing the natural consequences of betrayal. The day had been long, exhausting, and emotionally charged, but it had been a triumph of intelligence, patience, and careful planning. I had faced deception head-on and emerged empowered, calm, and in control. And as I turned off the lights and prepared to settle in for the night, I knew that the balance had been restored and that justice, quiet and precise, had been served. The tension in the apartment grew as the night deepened, and I, Leah Foster, watched Ryan move about the living room like a man trapped in his own web of lies. Every glance he cast toward the door, every sigh that escaped his lips, was a reminder that the consequences of his actions were finally catching up. I kept my composure, sitting quietly on the couch, pretending to scroll casually through my phone while inside. My mind was alive with the thrill of anticipation. I had spent the entire day preparing, documenting every payment, every receipt, every little detail that would solidify my position. The repossession of the car wasn't just a matter of paperwork. It was a carefully orchestrated sequence of actions that I had timed perfectly. Watching him slowly realize that he had miscalculated at every turn was almost intoxicating. There was no need for yelling, no need for dramatics. The suspense, the slow unraveling of his confidence, was far more satisfying. Ryan finally sank onto the couch across from me, rubbing his temples. "Leah, I didn't think," he began, his voice trembling. He struggled for words, searching desperately for a lifeline. Any argument that could undo the storm I had set in motion. I tilted my head, giving him a faint smile. "Didn't think what exactly?" I asked, my voice calm, measured, and deliberately slow. "That actions have consequences? That trust can be broken? Or that someone might actually notice when they're being taken advantage of?" His eyes darted nervously around the room, as if the walls themselves might whisper the answers. I didn't think you'd," his words trailed off, the panic in his tone growing. I could almost see the realization dawning, that he had underestimated me from the very beginning. I leaned back, keeping my expression serene. "Ryan, you've relied on charm, on assumptions, on my willingness to ignore certain things. But assumptions aren't facts. Charm doesn't pay bills, and ignoring things doesn't erase the truth." I let the silence linger, letting my words settle like stones in water. He swallowed hard, his lips pressing together as he processed what I had said. The apartment was quiet except for the subtle hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the floorboards. Every small sound seemed amplified in the tension-filled room, a reminder that nothing in this space was as it had been before. Finally, the phone rang, the finance company calling to confirm the repossession schedule. I picked it up casually, smiling. My tone was friendly, unassuming, but underneath it was the satisfaction of someone who had played the rules perfectly, using patience, intelligence, and timing as weapons. Ryan's head shot up at the sound of the phone. Leah, what did they say? His voice cracked slightly, betraying the fear he was trying to hide. I hung up the call and placed the phone on the table. They're on their way, I said softly, deliberately leaving out any hint of triumph in my tone. Everything is proceeding according to plan. His face paled, and he ran a hand through his hair, pacing again. I could feel the tension radiating from him, the slow unraveling of a man who had thought himself untouchable. The power dynamic had shifted completely, and it was all due to my careful planning and awareness. I watched him, calm and composed, as he muttered to himself. The words were fragmented, barely coherent, but they all carried the same meaning: panic, fear, and the dawning recognition of his own mistakes. It was remarkable to witness the transformation from arrogance and manipulation to uncertainty and apprehension. I decided to pour myself a glass of water, moving slowly through the kitchen to maintain the illusion of normalcy. The act was mundane, yet in the context of the evening, it carried weight. Every movement, every choice, was deliberate, part of the larger rhythm of control I had established over the day. When I returned to the living room, I noticed Ryan had stopped pacing. He was standing near the window, staring out as if searching for an escape that didn't exist. The silence was heavy, charged with the unspoken acknowledgement that his world was about to change irreversibly. I sat back down on the couch, crossing my legs and maintaining a calm demeanor. You know, Ryan, I said softly, there's a certain satisfaction in seeing someone realize they miscalculated. Not out of cruelty, but because it's a reminder that honesty, integrity, and attention to detail matter. You can't just rely on charm and hope it covers everything. He turned slowly toward me, his eyes wide and unsteady. Leah, I didn't. I held up a hand, signaling him to stop. Don't try to justify it. Just listen. Actions have consequences. Today, you're seeing that firsthand. You underestimated me, relied on assumptions, and ignored the truth. And now, I paused, letting the suspense hang in the air like a tangible presence. Ryan's lips pressed into a thin line. He didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, waiting for the next revelation, the next consequence. The air between us was electric with tension, the calm before the storm that was about to finalize the day's events. I reached for my laptop again, pretending to scroll casually, though I had already reviewed every detail earlier. Sometimes, I continued, my voice steady and deliberate, the most effective way to handle betrayal isn't confrontation in the moment. It's preparation, patience, and execution. And that's exactly what I've done. His face grew increasingly pale, the realization setting in more deeply with each word I spoke. He knew, without me having to explicitly say it, that the car he prized so much, the so-called dream car, was now beyond his control. The repossession process was underway, and the power he had assumed was entirely gone. I leaned back, letting my eyes soften, projecting calm and control. Ryan, this isn't about cruelty or revenge. It's about clarity, boundaries, and fairness. You tried to exploit my trust and generosity. I simply made sure that the balance was restored. He swallowed hard, his throat moving with effort as he tried to form a response. I didn't mean to, his voice trailed off, broken by the weight of understanding. I shook my head gently. Intentions aren't enough. They never are when actions contradict them. Today, you're seeing the outcome of your choices. The room remained silent for several minutes, the tension settling into a quiet but potent form of awareness. Ryan stood frozen, eyes flicking between me, the documents, and the empty spaces where evidence lay like silent witnesses to the day's revelations. Finally, I decided it was time to move to the next phase of the evening, the moment where the culmination of planning and patience would have its visible effect. I called a finance company once more, confirming the pickup window and ensuring that every detail was ready. Every step had been checked and double-checked, leaving no room for error. Ryan's head shot up at the sound of the call, his anxiety visibly spiking. He paced, muttered under his breath, and ran his hands through his hair repeatedly. It was almost mesmerizing to see someone confront the tangible consequences of their choices, someone who had relied on deceit and manipulation now facing the inevitable. I leaned back on the couch, crossing my arms comfortably, observing the scene with quiet satisfaction. The day had been long, emotionally charged, and exhausting, but the payoff was approaching. Ryan's anxiety, his dawning comprehension, and the impending repossession of the car were the results of my careful, deliberate actions. As night fell fully, the apartment took on a softer glow, the shadows stretching across the floor and walls. The tension between us was still thick, but it carried a new dimension, one of understanding, acknowledgement, and the undeniable truth that betrayal has consequences. I stood, stretching lightly, and spoke with deliberate calm. "Ryan, it's late now. There's nothing more to do except wait and see how everything unfolds. The consequences are in motion, and there's no undoing them. That's the reality of choices." He nodded slowly, his face pale, eyes wide with recognition. The man who had tried to use me for months was now subdued, quiet, and aware that the dynamic had shifted irrevocably. I returned to the couch, sitting comfortably and letting the calm envelop the room. The suspense, the anticipation, and the eventual consequences were more powerful than any outburst or confrontation could have been. I had acted decisively, strategically, and ethically, reclaiming what was mine and teaching an undeniable lesson in accountability. By the time the finance company confirmed that the repossession truck was en route, Ryan had collapsed onto the couch, staring blankly at the wall, fully grasping the extent of what had been set in motion. The car, his prized possession, the symbol of his arrogance and entitlement, was about to leave his hands forever. I felt a quiet sense of satisfaction, not from cruelty, but from clarity, empowerment, and justice. I had faced betrayal, manipulation, and deceit, and I had emerged calm, collected, and in control. The day had been a lesson in patience, awareness, and the consequences of underestimating someone. As the night deepened, I sat quietly, observing Ryan as the reality of his choices continued to sink in. The balance had been restored, subtly but decisively, and the repercussions were unfolding exactly as planned. I had not acted out of anger, but out of a sense of fairness and self-respect. And in that moment, I knew the day's events would stay with both of us forever. The lesson was clear: trust is earned, boundaries are not to be ignored, and actions always carry consequences. The repossession was imminent, and with it, the final acknowledgement of the power that comes from patience, intelligence, and decisive action. By the time the repossession team arrived, the apartment was quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional rustle of papers. I, Leah Foster, sat calmly on the couch, crossing my legs, pretending to scroll on my phone. Inside, my heart raced with anticipation. Every moment, every detail, had been carefully orchestrated, and now the final act of the day was unfolding. Ryan's eyes widened the moment he heard the knock at the door. His face drained of color, and he glanced at me, searching for some signal, some reassurance that this wasn't real. But I stayed still, my expression calm, almost serene. "They're here," I said softly, letting the weight of the statement hang in the air. He bolted toward the door, fumbling with the lock, but the team outside was professional and prepared. They introduced themselves politely, showing identification and explaining the process. Ryan stammered, trying to assert some semblance of control, but the papers I had signed, the cosigner details, and the documented payments made it clear who held the authority. I didn't realize," he muttered, voice trembling. I met his gaze steadily. Didn't realize what exactly? That consequences are real? That actions matter? My tone was calm, deliberate. I wanted him to feel the weight of his choices, to understand that this wasn't impulsive cruelty. It was careful, precise justice. The repossession team moved efficiently, documenting the vehicle, taking photos, and preparing it for transport. Ryan hovered nearby, helpless, his hands wringing nervously. I noticed the tension in his jaw, the way his shoulders slumped under the weight of realization. Every movement, every glance, confirmed that the plan had worked exactly as intended. I leaned back on the couch, watching quietly as they loaded the car onto the truck. The sound of metal and machinery, the sight of his dream car being lifted and secured, was almost symbolic, the final act in a long sequence of deception, manipulation, and betrayal finally coming to closure. Ryan muttered under his breath, pacing in short, uneven steps. "Leah, this can't be happening," he said, his voice breaking. I stayed silent, letting the moment stretch. There was no need to explain, no need to justify. The evidence, the documentation, the official paperwork, all of it spoke louder than any words I could offer. He had learned his lesson in the most concrete way possible. One of the repossession team members glanced at me politely. "All set, ma'am," they said. "We have everything documented. The vehicle will be transported according to the schedule." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. "Thank you," I said softly. The formality of their words and actions contrasted sharply with the emotional storm swirling within the apartment. Ryan's disbelief was palpable. As the truck drove away, I could see the subtle shift in Ryan. His head hung low, his shoulders drooping. The symbol of his arrogance, his entitlement, and his misuse of my generosity was now gone. I felt a quiet sense of satisfaction, not from malice, but from knowing that balance had been restored and that the consequences of deceit had been fully realized. He sank onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. I can't believe this," he whispered. I remained seated across from him, calm and composed. "Believe it," I said softly. "Believe that choices have consequences, that trust can't be taken for granted, and that ignoring the truth only leads to moments like this." The apartment was heavy with silence. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the papers on the table, seemed amplified in the tension-filled room. Ryan's breathing was uneven, shallow, almost panicked, and I noticed the subtle tremor in his hands. I stood and walked slowly around the room, maintaining a deliberate, composed demeanor. "You know," I said softly, "it's remarkable how people underestimate what patience, awareness, and preparation can achieve. You relied on charm and assumptions. I relied on attention to detail and understanding the rules. That difference makes all the impact." He lifted his head slightly, eyes red from stress and disbelief. "Leah, his voice faltered, and I could see the dawning comprehension in his expression. I stopped in front of him, letting the moment sink in. "You didn't what? Notice? Care? Understand that your choices affect others? You had months to consider honesty and trust, and you chose manipulation. Today, the consequences have arrived." His gaze dropped to the floor, avoiding mine. I know," he whispered. I took a deep breath, letting the silence linger. There was power in quiet observation, in letting someone fully internalize the reality of their miscalculations. No theatrics, no shouting, just the undeniable truth that actions have weight, and deceit carries a cost. I moved toward the kitchen to pour a glass of water, deliberately slow and calm, as if nothing significant had happened. The simplicity of the act contrasted sharply with the emotional upheaval that Ryan was experiencing. It was a subtle demonstration that composure, strategy, and awareness are far more effective than confrontation fueled by anger. Returning to the couch, I sat and crossed my legs. "Ryan, I want you to understand something," I said softly. "This isn't about cruelty. This is about clarity, fairness, and accountability. I've been used, manipulated, and underestimated. Today, The balance has shifted, and you are now witnessing the result of your actions. His eyes met mine briefly, filled with a mixture of fear, remorse, and astonishment. I get it now, he said quietly, his voice trembling. I nodded slightly, letting the words settle. Good. That's the first step toward understanding the weight of what's been done. The next steps, those are up to you. Actions now determine whether trust can ever be rebuilt and whether honesty can replace manipulation. He looked down again, silent, reflecting on the irreversible changes the day had brought. The car was gone, the evidence irrefutable, and the dynamic between us fundamentally altered. The consequences were clear, and there was no reversing them. I glanced at the clock on the wall. The day had been long, exhausting, and emotionally charged, yet every moment had been deliberate, calculated, and precise. From the moment I realized I had been used, to the planning, documentation, and execution, every action had been designed to ensure that fairness was restored without unnecessary drama. Ryan's breathing had slowed, but the tension in his body remained. He was processing, internalizing, and facing the reality of his choices. The shift in power was complete, subtle, calm, and undeniable. I leaned back, letting the weight of the day settle. The repossession had been executed flawlessly, the consequences delivered effectively, and the lessons unmistakably clear. It wasn't revenge in a dramatic sense. It was a quiet, precise assertion of boundaries, awareness, and self-respect. The evening light had dimmed further, casting long shadows across the apartment. Ryan remained seated, silent, staring at the wall, while I observed with a sense of calm satisfaction. Every step, every decision, every action had led to this moment, and the outcome was exactly as it should be. I finally spoke, my voice soft but steady. Ryan, remember this day. Remember the choices you made, the trust you broke, and the consequences you faced. Let it guide you in the future, should you ever hope to rebuild integrity and respect. He nodded slowly, the weight of comprehension pressing down on him. The emotional landscape of the day had been intense, but it had reached its natural, inevitable conclusion. I had acted with patience, intelligence, and precision, reclaiming control over what was mine and demonstrating the real cost of manipulation. As night fully settled, I felt a quiet sense of closure. The car, the evidence, the confrontation, all had aligned perfectly. Ryan had learned, without theatrics or dramatic outbursts, that deceit has consequences and trust is not to be taken lightly. I moved toward the kitchen to grab a final glass of water, reflecting on the day's events. Each step, each choice, each calculated moment had led to this point, a culmination of patience, strategy, and calm determination. I had faced betrayal and emerged empowered, composed, and clear-headed. Returning to the living room, I noticed Ryan's posture had softened slightly, the panic giving way to subdued acceptance. He understood now, fully and undeniably, that the balance had shifted and that his previous attempts at control and manipulation had failed. I sat back down, crossed my legs, and took a deep breath. The day had been long, emotionally taxing, and filled with tension, but it had been a triumph of awareness, strategy, and ethical action. The lesson was clear: deception carries consequences, trust must be respected, and patience can yield the most satisfying resolutions. The apartment was quiet, save for the subtle hum of the refrigerator and the faint sound of traffic outside. The day's events had run their course, leaving clarity, accountability, and empowerment in their wake. Ryan had faced the tangible results of his actions, and the balance had been restored. I leaned back, feeling the calm settle over me. The day had begun with deceit, manipulation, and betrayal, but it ended with understanding, boundaries firmly reestablished, and the natural consequences of actions fully realized. The car was gone, the lessons had been delivered, and the emotional clarity was undeniable. And as I looked at Ryan, silent and subdued, I realized that sometimes the most effective resolution isn't dramatic confrontation. It's calculated, patient, and grounded in awareness, letting the consequences speak louder than words ever could. The apartment felt quieter now, the intensity of the repossession fading into a heavy, lingering tension. Leah Foster, remained on the couch, watching Ryan slump further into the cushions. His face was pale, eyes fixed on the floor, and every movement seemed measured, hesitant, as though he was processing each moment in slow motion. There was no dramatic outburst, no anger-fueled confrontation, just the quiet, undeniable weight of realization settling over him. I sipped my water calmly, letting him feel the silence fully. The quiet itself carried more impact than any words I could have spoken. Every second that ticked by reinforced the message. Actions have consequences, and manipulation eventually meets accountability. Finally, Ryan's voice broke the silence, soft and almost pleading. Leah, I don't even know where to begin. I tilted my head, studying him. Start with honesty, I said softly. Not excuses, not justifications, not attempts to minimize your actions. Just the truth.
Can you do that?
He swallowed hard, nodding slowly. I used to. I relied on you for rent, for money I shouldn't have expected, for everything. I thought you'd never notice, or that you'd just let it slide. His voice trembled slightly. I was wrong. I see that now. I allowed a faint, approving smile to touch my lips. Acknowledgement is the first step, I said. Recognition of what was done is necessary before anything can be repaired. But it doesn't erase the past. It simply allows you to understand the consequences of your choices. He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture of frustration and regret combined. I never meant to hurt you. I didn't think. I shook my head gently. Intentions matter very little when actions contradict them. You chose convenience over honesty, manipulation over communication, and entitlement over respect. That's what matters. And today, you're seeing the impact of that choice. The room was still for a long moment, only the faint hum of the refrigerator breaking the silence. I watched him as he struggled to internalize the reality. His arrogance, entitlement, and deception had been met with calm, calculated accountability. The car was gone. The documents were irrefutable. The consequences were clear. I stood and walked slowly to the window, looking out at the city lights. The night was calm, ordinary, yet inside this apartment, an extraordinary shift had occurred. Ryan's understanding, his realization, and the undeniable acknowledgement of his mistakes were all unfolding before me. He moved closer, voice hesitant. Leah, will things ever go back to how they were? I turned to face him, meeting his gaze steadily. Things will never be the same, I said softly. Not because I seek vengeance, but because trust, once broken, cannot be fully restored. It can be rebuilt, perhaps, but only with consistent honesty, accountability, and respect. You have a choice now, to act differently or to continue down the same path. He nodded slowly, taking a seat across from me. I understand, he admitted quietly. His eyes were heavy with reflection, the weight of the day pressing down on him. I'll do better. I swear. I studied him for a moment, weighing his sincerity. Actions, not words, I replied. Promises are meaningless without consistent effort. Today was a lesson, and how you move forward will determine whether trust can ever exist again. Ryan's shoulders slumped further, exhaustion and emotional overwhelm evident in every gesture. The consequences of his choices had been delivered quietly, efficiently, and effectively, a stark contrast to the chaos he had tried to create in my life. I moved back to the couch, sitting comfortably, letting the gravity of the day settle around us. You relied on assumptions, I said softly. You assumed I wouldn't notice, that I wouldn't act, that I wouldn't take control of what was mine. Today, those assumptions were challenged, and the results are undeniable. He looked down, voice barely audible. I see that now. I really do. I allowed a moment of silence, letting him feel the full weight of understanding. There was no need to lecture further. The combination of loss, accountability, and realization was far more effective than any words I could offer. The evening air grew cooler, drifting through the slightly open window. The city outside moved on, unaware of the quiet, intense emotional reckoning unfolding within the apartment. Ryan remained seated, silent, absorbing the lessons of the day. I reached for my phone, casually scrolling through messages from friends checking in. Jenna texted earlier. I mentioned casually. She's glad everything is handled, that you've seen the reality of your actions. She's proud of the way I managed this. Ryan's eyes flicked toward me, a mixture of embarrassment and acknowledgement. I can see why, he muttered. You handled everything calmly, perfectly. I nodded slowly, keeping my expression neutral. Calmness is powerful, I said. It allows clarity, observation, and precise action. Anger or drama might satisfy temporarily, but strategy and awareness achieve results that last. Today, you've learned that lesson firsthand. He ran a hand over his face, exhaling slowly. I never realized. I thought I could just take advantage and everything would be fine. I shook my head. That's the problem with assumptions. They ignore reality, disregard consequences, and underestimate the awareness of others. I never assumed anything. I observed, planned, and acted. The result is undeniable. Ryan's shoulders sagged, his energy depleted. The apartment felt heavy, almost solemn, as the day's events reached their emotional peak. Every detail, the car, the documents, the confirmation calls, had converged to create an irrefutable reality. I leaned back on the couch, feeling a deep sense of calm and empowerment. This day had been long, emotionally charged, and draining, but it had been a victory of awareness, strategy, and patience. I had faced deception head-on and emerged not only unscathed, but stronger, composed, and in control. Ryan finally spoke again, his voice quiet and reflective. Leah. I understand now. I really do. I nodded, giving him a small, subtle smile. Understanding is the first step. The next steps are up to you. Actions, consistency, and accountability will determine whether trust, respect, and honesty can ever exist between us again. He nodded slowly, his face a mixture of remorse, realization, and quiet acceptance. The dynamic had shifted irrevocably. He had relied on manipulation, deceit, and charm, and all of it had been met with calm, deliberate action, and accountability. I stood, stretching lightly, feeling the weight of the day settle into a profound sense of clarity. The lessons had been delivered. The consequences had been realized. And the power of patience, preparation, and strategic thinking had been demonstrated unmistakably. Ryan's gaze followed me as I moved toward the window again, looking out at the city lights. I see everything now, he said quietly. I won't forget this. I'll do better. I turned, meeting his eyes with calm assurance. I hope you will, I said softly. Not for me, but for yourself. Understanding the impact of your choices is crucial for growth, responsibility, and integrity. Today was a demonstration, not punishment. The rest is up to you. He nodded, silent, absorbing the weight of the moment. The apartment remained quiet, the atmosphere charged with reflection, accountability, and the subtle satisfaction of lessons learned. I returned to the couch, feeling a profound sense of closure. The car was gone, the evidence was irrefutable, and the lesson had been internalized. The day, long and intense, had reached its natural conclusion, a resolution grounded in patience, awareness, and deliberate, ethical action. Ryan exhaled slowly, his posture softening. Thank you for handling everything so calmly, he said quietly. I allowed a faint smile to touch my lips. Calmness is often more effective than confrontation, I said. It allows clarity, observation, and decisive action. Today proved that, didn't it? He nodded, voice barely above a whisper. It did. I get it now. I felt the weight of the day settle into a quiet, reflective calm. Every moment, every choice, every action had been deliberate, carefully executed, and ethically sound. The balance had been restored, and the lessons were unmistakable. As the night deepened, I sat quietly, reflecting on the events. Betrayal, manipulation, and deceit had been met with patience, preparation, and clarity. The day had been long, challenging, and emotionally intense, but it had been a triumph of awareness, strategic action, and ethical resolution. Ryan remained seated across from me, silent, contemplative, and deeply aware of the consequences of his choices. The shift in power, subtle yet undeniable, had been fully realized. I took a deep breath, feeling a profound sense of empowerment. The day had begun with deception and ended with clarity, accountability, and reflection. The lessons were delivered without drama, the consequences were evident, and the balance had been restored. And as I looked at Ryan, subdued and reflective, I knew that the day's events would leave a lasting impression, a quiet, powerful testament to the importance of honesty, respect, and awareness in every relationship. The apartment had grown quiet again, the night settling over the city like a calm blanket. Leah Foster, remained seated on the couch, sipping a final glass of water, letting the events of the day resonate. Every detail, every calculated step, every moment of patience had led to this point. Ryan, across from me, remained still, processing, learning, and perhaps finally understanding the depth of the choices he had made. He shifted slightly, breaking the silence. "Leah, I can't believe I let it get this far," he admitted quietly, his voice thick with remorse. His posture was slumped, shoulders heavy with acknowledgement and regret. It was a humbling sight, the man who had once carried arrogance and entitlement now subdued by his own actions. I allowed a soft, calm smile to touch my lips. "You carried assumptions, Ryan," I said gently. "Assumptions that trust could be manipulated, that generosity could be taken for granted, that consequences were optional. Today proved otherwise." He ran a hand through his hair, voice breaking slightly. I see that now. I really do. And I want to make things right, somehow." I tilted my head thoughtfully. Making things right starts with understanding, consistency, and honesty. Words alone aren't enough. Your actions moving forward will define whether trust can ever be rebuilt. Ryan's eyes met mine, brimming with a mixture of fear, remorse, and hope. I'll do better. I promise. Not just for you, but for myself. I see the mistakes, and I want to change. I nodded slowly, keeping my expression composed. Good. That's a start. Accountability, reflection, and conscious effort will determine whether the lessons of today have any lasting impact. Today, you experience the consequences. Tomorrow, you determine the path forward. He exhaled deeply, letting the weight of the day settle. I can't thank you enough," he murmured. I'll never forget this." I allowed a faint smile, acknowledging his sincerity. This day wasn't about punishment. It was about clarity, balance, and fairness. You were given a chance to understand the consequences of deception and manipulation, and now that understanding is yours to carry. The apartment remained quiet, save for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant sounds of traffic below. Ryan remained seated, contemplative, subdued, and deeply aware of the events that had transpired. I took a deep breath, reflecting on the day myself. From the moment I realized I had been used to the planning, documentation, and execution, every action had been deliberate. Every step had been calculated to ensure fairness, clarity, and empowerment. The car had been repossessed, the lessons internalized, and the balance restored. "Ryan," I said softly, "remember that accountability is a lifelong practice. One day, one consequence, one lesson may leave a strong impression, but change requires continued effort. Actions now will determine how others perceive your integrity and trustworthiness." He nodded slowly, voice barely above a whisper. I understand. I really do. I leaned back, letting the calm of the night settle over both of us. The tension, the anticipation, and the emotional turmoil of the day had reached their natural conclusion. The events had been intense, yes, but also deliberate, ethical, and grounded in reality. Ryan's eyes met mine briefly. I never thought I'd see things this clearly, he admitted. I thought I could get away with everything. I was wrong. I shook my head gently. That's the nature of assumptions, I said. They ignore reality and consequences. Today proved that reality always catches up, and consequences are inevitable when actions betray trust. He exhaled slowly, shoulders sagging with relief and resignation. I have a lot to think about. A lot to fix. I nodded, appreciating his honesty. And that's exactly what this day was meant to show you. Reflection, understanding, and accountability are the first steps toward genuine change. The rest is entirely up to you. The room remained still, filled with a quiet, reflective calm. The city outside was alive with the usual night sounds, but inside, a transformation had taken place. The challenges, the manipulation, and the emotional intensity of the day had been navigated carefully, resulting in clarity, accountability, and resolution. Ryan watched me, eyes wide, still processing the gravity of the day. Leah, I didn't realize. I see now how everything matters, he said quietly. I smiled softly. Everything matters. Trust, honesty, boundaries, accountability. These are the things that define relationships, partnerships, and interactions. Today was a reminder that taking them lightly carries consequences. He nodded slowly, voice subdued. I'll carry this with me. Always. I walked toward the window, looking out at the night sky. The city lights twinkled, ordinary yet comforting, as though reflecting the calm that had finally settled in the apartment. The events of the day, intense and emotionally charged, had reached their natural resolution. I turned back to Ryan, who remained seated, quiet, and reflective. Remember this day, I said softly. Not out of spite or anger, but as a reminder of the importance of integrity, respect, and awareness. Lessons are only valuable if they are remembered and applied. He exhaled, nodding. I understand. Thank you for showing me, calmly and clearly, without yelling or anger. I allowed a faint smile, acknowledging the sincerity in his voice. Calmness and clarity often achieve more than anger ever could. Today proved that decisively. The apartment was quiet once more. Ryan, subdued, reflective, and aware, had absorbed the lessons. I, composed, empowered, and strategically satisfied, had ensured that fairness, respect, and clarity were restored. The car was gone, the lessons internalized, and the balance reestablished. I returned to the couch, sitting comfortably, letting the calm of the night envelop me. The day had begun with deception, manipulation, and betrayal, but it ended with understanding, accountability, and empowerment. The events had unfolded without drama, without theatrics, yet the impact was undeniable. Ryan spoke softly, voice hesitant but sincere. I'll never forget this day. I see now how much I relied on wrong assumptions and took advantage of trust. I nodded slowly, voice calm. Remember it well. Let it guide your actions, your decisions, and the way you treat others. The lessons of today are clear, and the path forward is yours to shape responsibly. He exhaled deeply, a mixture of relief, resignation, and newfound awareness evident in his demeanor. I will. I promise. Actions will follow understanding. I allowed the silence to stretch for a moment, letting the weight of the day, the consequences, and the lessons settle fully. There was a quiet satisfaction in observing someone confront the reality of their choices, and in knowing that the process had been handled with calm, precision, and ethical awareness. Finally, I stood, stretching lightly, feeling the emotional and mental exhaustion of the day fade into a sense of calm closure. The lessons had been delivered, the consequences realized, and the balance restored. Ryan had faced his actions, and I had maintained composure, clarity, and empowerment throughout. I glanced around the apartment one last time, reflecting on the journey of the day. From deceit and manipulation to accountability, clarity, and empowerment, every moment had been a lesson in patience, awareness, and strategic action. The car was gone, the confrontation handled quietly, and the impact undeniable. Ryan remained seated, silent, contemplative, and deeply aware of the day's lessons. The dynamic had shifted, subtly yet irrevocably, and the consequences of his choices were clear. I sat back on the couch, feeling a profound sense of resolution. The day had been long, emotionally intense, and strategically complex, yet it concluded with fairness, clarity, and empowerment. The lessons were learned, the consequences accepted, and the balance fully restored. "Remember, Ryan," I said softly, "today was not about revenge. It was about awareness, boundaries, accountability, and integrity. Carry these lessons with you, and let them guide your future actions." He nodded quietly, the realization fully settled in. I understand, Leah. I really do. Thank you." I allowed myself a faint smile, leaning back comfortably. The apartment was still, the night deep, and the lessons of the day fully absorbed. The balance of fairness, trust, and clarity had been restored, leaving both of us with a quiet, reflective calm. And in that moment, I knew the day had been resolved perfectly, with patience, strategy, and awareness guiding every step. The consequences had been realized, the lessons internalized, and the emotional equilibrium finally achieved. The journey from manipulation to accountability had ended, leaving clarity, empowerment, and a profound sense of closure.